Well, I so appreciate the invitation to be here, and hopefully we'll give you some value, make this valuable for you, and glad that you spent your hour with me. I will tell you as I go through, I have art, mostly art, done by our students throughout my presentation. I won't talk about most of them. I will talk about this one. This was kind of interesting. We had an art student who liked to play WoW and interview WoW players. Wait a minute, no. Okay, that's they're all shy. But anyhow, Blizzard had a contest that said, what would Starbucks look like in World of Warcraft? And so this was her submission. It was a winner, and they ended up hiring her. She's now an artist on the WoW team. So I thought that was kind of cool to start out with. But anyhow, I'll have pictures. Most of them I won't talk about. I'll just leave them up to make it interesting. Oh yeah, this one. I shuffle through the picture. I'm not quite sure. It's like a slideshow karaoke. I'm not sure it's going to be in here. This is a particularly interesting one because it was a VR project, and of course it doesn't show VR here in 3D. But most of you have probably seen the 3D goggles that are all the rage now. And some of you may even have, for the high-end Samsung phones, the Notes, that you can put in little goggles put on your head. That was actually a project that was started by one of our alumni. This was a project we did in conjunction with Samsung. One of the tricks is when you play 3D games, there's a graphical technique called bump mapping that makes bumpy surfaces like the brick or the stone there in the background, or the wrinkles that you can't see real well on this projector, on the bedspread, happen, but it's cheap. It only works when you have a single screen, and so when you go into VR, it doesn't work. So we were experimenting with ways to see if we could make the cheap work in the VR space. And so that was a master's thesis project that was exciting. Let's see when we get to the text, it's really boring. So what we're going to talk about today. You already heard who I am, so not a lot to talk about there. Talk a little bit about the video game industry. Maybe we have a lot of ideas about it. Some of them true, some of them not true. Hopefully open up some new categories. And then a little bit about the Guildhall where I teach. So yeah, there's some of the games I've worked on. I like to say it seems like my career has all been about brands. What brand can I be associated with? But let's talk a little bit about the video game industry. And so I'll just ask broadly, if I ask you to describe the average video game player, what would they look like? The most common.
Glasses, yeah.
But this is interactive. Go ahead. Shout out some answers.
Gaming addict.
A gaming addict? Okay.
Everyone.
Everyone games.
Whoever's currently on their phone.
On their phone. But if I said video gamer, what's the image that you would picture in your head? What kind of person?
Somebody with a beard. That's okay.
Yeah, young, male.
That South Park episode.
We don't have basements typically here in Texas, right? But it's youth in their parents' basement with not a lot of friends, not a lot of social skills, right? With their Xbox playing Call of Duty. Yeah, so I like I said, it's been a long time. So the first thing is we can talk about age. When you look at the age of who games, you will find that the under 18 is not the largest. It turns out the over 50 is the largest. And you know it's not. And it really goes to this.
It's actually 1835 is 30%.
Did I get it wrong?
Yes.
Okay. 18 to 35. There's an interesting thing when you look at the age of gamers, that basically if you grew up with when games existed, you play games of some sort, is a general rule, and you will see that. So one of the questions that I like to ask Does anyone know what the average age of a U.S. senator is?
49.
Like 65. They're old. I haven't looked in the newest after the past election. It was 64.8 the last Congress. I should look again and update that data. When they were born, did video games exist? No. So did they grow up playing video games? No. Do they have any first-person experience with them? Probably not. The Obama White House was the first White House to have a video game console in it. His daughters wanted to play Wii, so they have a Wii. So that's the first president who's played console games in the White House. It's kind of amazing if you think about it, right? And so you can ask, who writes laws? Well, the people who make our laws don't play video games. Do we expect them to make laws that are informed about what video games are? Probably not. But it's okay, because, time moves on, and pretty soon, older people or younger people will become older people, and they will be in. This was another master's project. This one was, I don't know if you have any board game geeks, there's a new game out called Cthulhu. And this is one of the pieces of the model some of our students did. Work with it. So the other thing we can ask is the male-female breakdown. And you can see, when we get down to it, slightly more men in the game than women, but not as large as a percentage if you look. In fact, if you want to go to the demographic that has the largest just overall number of players, actually I think I have a slide. It shows it a little better. Is that mobile games right there. We talked about how mobile games rule the world, and the vast majority of mobile game players are middle-aged women. Which is interesting because most of them would not call themselves gamers because of the stigma attached to it. However, you will find, Words with Friends and games of this sort. The match games are very popular. And so again, it really goes back, I think you said, if you look at games, it's everyone. It's like saying, who sees movies, right? Everyone. Obviously, there are some people who are movie fans and go to the movie theater every weekend. But generally, most people do it when you look at kind of entertainment dollars. Here's another great question. What's the largest video game company? We got a Nintendo over here. Any other? Capcom, a Japanese company. Blizzard, Activision Blizzard. Sony.
Are you asking video game developer or
video game company? Who makes the most money?
Microsoft?
Sells the most units? We could ask us. Or Microsoft out there?
Oh, Steam.
So if you look at this, PC is larger than console, but if you put Android and iOS together, you get bigger. So the largest video game company by units sold and by dollars is Apple. Kind of an interesting thing when you think about it, and history is an interesting thing. We can learn from it. Something you probably don't know, you can look it up on Wikipedia. Apple at one time had a video game console. It's called the Pippin. It was basically a bad Macintosh that you could plug into your TV. It didn't sell. I think it lasted all of about 2 weeks on store shelves. But it was a very bad experience for Apple. And so they decided, this whole video game thing, we're not into it. We don't make money off of it. We don't do it. Roll the clock forward. The iPhone ships. Still didn't see themselves or games as very important. They saw that the iPhone is kind of this important, business tool, right? You do email on it. You can stay connected until their CFO came, and this is the story as it was told to me, came and said, you do realize that we make more money selling games on iTunes than anything else. Movies, music, games, that's where the money is. And so suddenly Apple decided that maybe they were a game company and that they should invest and put into that. And so they have also the similar sort of thing with Google. Google said, we're really not a game company. That's not what we do. And now the game development portion of Android is one of the biggest divisions there. Oops. So one of the things we do is our art students make concept sketches. We have to put them in games. So we said, consoles are kind of going away. Made a big deal of that. But it's interesting to note, you can see here, while you can make a lot of money in games, that it's often the console games that pull in the big money. That said, we talked about mobile a lot. And a good question is, how much money is there to be made on mobile games? If you look at a game that hits the top of the charts, Clash of Clans, we have there. One of the other ones that may surprise you as biggest money makers is Kim Kardashian. I won't ask any of you to admit whether you actually have it on your phone or the companion Kylie app. They typically make about $1 million a week. Yeah, that'd be nice to be in that revenue stream, right? So you can make fun of either of those games. Obviously, they have hit a nerve with people. Mobile is interesting. If you're in the top 4 or 5, that's kind of the money you'll tend to make. If you go down to kind of the top 6 to 10, maybe you're making 10 to 100,000 a week, and after that, you make very little. It's you might make 30,000 lifetime on a game if you're lucky. So there's this very steep cliff. It's very hit driven. If you have a hit, you make lots of money. If you don't have a hit, you don't make very much money. So we can ask how large the video game industry is. And a question I'm sure you'll all get right, but it is one that bears asking, is what's bigger, the music industry, the movie industry, or the game industry? Games. And in fact, not only is it the biggest, it is bigger than the other two combined. And it is bigger than the other two combined, what I say all in. People have been saying this for years, that games is bigger. And they talk about, like we all saw in the news, Pokemon Go. These big hits being bigger than the biggest blockbuster movie. But you think about, is box office sales the only ways that movies make money?
No.
Is the only way music makes money is through selling music? No, there's lots of other merchandise, right? Clothes with artists, little toys, all these things. Games make more than movies and music, all in. Even consuming all the other related merchandise that comes in, games are still bigger.
Pretty much these days, with the video and music, hopefully why they're pretty much at the lower. If now these days people rather just like hiring them than paying for.
Well, there may be a business model there, right?
Even with the game, they would. Some of them probably are hired, but also the game designers are paying like coding that will identify as a hired game, or if it wasn't bought properly, there'd be detail in the game where there'll be a bunch of lag and stuff to it.
So right, there's people add DRM, both digital rights management, copy protection ways to prevent you from pirating any source of media. That's an interesting subject on its own. Any entertainment suffers from that. how much is lost, it's debatable. So here's an interesting chart. So this is U.S. video game revenue in billions of dollars. This is kind of interesting. I recommend you take a look at this chart and see if there's some things we can learn from it. So one thing, you'll notice that there's some points that it goes down. You think, well, video games are so great, such a great industry, why does it make less money? We can talk about it. Some of the things are expected. In this 2004 to 2005 time frame, one of the things that happened there, and why this one was expected, is we had a console change cycle, right? So we had the end of a console life, moving into a new console. What happens to sales of games when gamers know that there's a new console coming out next year? They drop, because they're saving their money to buy that new Xbox One, that PS4. Now, this is just US. Console cycles are staggered across worldwide. If we went to worldwide numbers, revenue would have still been up here. But look at data, you can learn so many things. Now, we've also got this other kind of dip down here. Anyone want to guess why we see that dip? What was happening in the 2012-2013 time frame? Well, let me ask this. Where do these numbers come from? It comes from the US, but how do we calculate this? How do we get these numbers? Where does the data?
From all the companies?
From the companies. And when we get it from the companies, how do we get it from the companies?
Store sales? Financial statements?
Right? So public companies, we can look at their stock filings, and they will tell us how much they sold. We can go ask stores. You may not know this, but big retailers, Walmart, Target, right? When you buy something, they sell that data. How many of this did we sell during these hours to these type of people? Yes, you're being tracked, even when you don't buy online. So we can generate some of this. And I will ask, we just saw it earlier, what one store, if you will, or what are the biggest stores that sell games now?
Steam, Amazon?
Steam is one, and we saw the other, it's Apple and Google, right? Steam is a private company. Do we have any idea how much money they made selling games? No, a lot, right? So can I put Steam sales into this data? No. Apple is a publicly traded company, but they don't break out games versus music versus movies. They just say, this is the sales at the iTunes store. So again, you can't easily put the games in here. Do we really believe the revenue for games went down in these years? No. It's just that we don't have accurate to the data anymore because it's privately held, which is kind of an interesting thing if you want to do research on this. That said, you'll also notice last year is 2015. You might think, well, that's kind of old. It's 2 years old. Well, typically the data for this for a year will come out in March. So we'll get 2016 in about a month. But preliminary figures, and people are starting to get their arms around how to do this digital sales, you come around this, is we expect U.S. revenues to be about $30+ billion. So big number. Another way to look at it is number of games sold per year, number of games released. You know, there's this market, driven thing, supply and demand. The more people who want to buy it, the more people are going to try and sell it, right? And again, we'll get data here in March. But you can just see, even just on Steam, and so this is obviously just PC games, the number of games released is going up. which is to say there is a huge demand for developers who know how to make these games. What do I got here? Okay, this gives us kind of a little bit of worldwide numbers. And you can kind of see the difference between, there's still actually a fair amount of money on web games. I don't know who's still playing Farmville on Facebook, but somebody is. They're obviously spending money on it. And again, you can see phone games are starting to overtake the console games, but not quite yet. That's something. And PC Master Race, that's still where all the money is. Yeah, for those of you who play the PC games. Another way to talk about this is how much do people make doing games. There's really 4 main disciplines that people are needed to make games. Programming, most people know that. Art and animation, that's pretty obvious too. There's also designers who come up with the ideas for the games and how they work. And production, that's really the business project manager side of it. So they're about schedules, they're about budgets, they're about team dynamics. How do we get creative people? It's kind of an interesting question. A big AAA game, be it mobile or console, how many people does it take to make a video game? It depends. But just, take a top game, so like Clash of Clans or Call of Duty.
Call of Duty a lot.
Like, what's a lot?
Like
10, 50?
200 people?
1,000?
What about like an online game like Overwatch 5?
Like Overwatch, yeah. How many people are on the Overwatch team?
So,
See, a team like that will take between 200 and 400 people. So Overwatch is a little smaller. Blizzard likes to keep their teams a little more contracted. You do a Call of Duty, that'll be more like 400. Maybe, 200, 300. The Clash of Clans. So if you think about it, these free-to-play download games, they take 2 years, hundreds of people. Even if you just guess an average salary and do the math, you do that as a homework assignment. How much money does it take to develop these games? But again, they're following those big profits we saw earlier. They're expensive to develop, but if you get a hit, there's big money, and so there's people looking to hire them. So this is a slide I will talk about because it's not obvious what's going on here. One of the assignments that we have for our artists is they have to take an image from a magazine. That would be the one on the left. And then they have to replicate it in Photoshop. That would be the one on the right. And they have to do it. They can't scan it in. They can't trace it. They have to just eyeball it and look it in. And we have some great ways to ensure that happens. But it's very impressive, at least to me as a programmer. Oops, I just skipped. There we go. So it was interesting. One of the comments I got as I was preparing this, I said, "Can you talk about the environment in video games?" Which is a little bit was a little left turn. I had to think about it for a little bit. And so I will say this is just my personal reflections on the environment. One of the things we like to do at the Guildhall, though, is kind of think broadly and beyond. And so I would ask you to think a little bit about cars, right? Typically now when we think about the automobile, we think of it, unless it's a Tesla, as being not great for the environment, right? They're polluting, right? Creating all this particulate matter. You look at things, the number one cause of smog is cars in cities. But when the car was invented, it was actually a huge step forward in terms of the environment. Because what did people have before cars? Horses. Horses create a lot of sewage. You can imagine if every car in that parking lot was a horse, what that parking lot would look like. There's a reason, they're almost more ceremonial now, right? But there's a reason Texans wear boots, right? There were a lot of horses. They had to walk through crap, right? I mean, literally. And that was a huge environmental problem. It was about disease. It was about, cars are way cleaner than that, right? And so as you look through history, right, there's these transitions points. And so when we get to games, if you think about it, we could talk about little things like, saving energy on your computer by turning it off. But I would encourage you to kind of think again in this big kind of mindset. If I am a game developer, what natural resources do I need? I need electricity, and I need one other thing probably. Computer, yeah.
Time.
Water, time. Yeah. Sugar and caffeine. But I probably need a connection to the internet, right? As long as I've got good Wi-Fi and good electricity, laptop, I'm golden. And this lets me create these online shared experiences, right? When you take the ability to network at high speed around the world in these virtual spaces that we can interact, that is a very efficient way for us as humans to interact, right? So I think one of the experiences that was amazing for me as a parent is I was playing an online game with my sons, and we ended up, just like you do sometimes, we're going to say, put us in a clan, whatever. And where we ended up was one that was actually a group of high school students in Yemen who were taking an English class and decided to try and learn English. They created a U.S. clan in hopes that people would join and they could chat. And that was an incredible experience, right? Because that's cross-cultural, around shared interests, and allowed us to have conversations. One of the things that was profound to me was, with my high schoolers, right? When you're a high schooler and you have a bad day in Yemen, it's a lot worse. Even your best day is probably a lot worse than your worst day as a kid here in Texas, right? In high school. Now that's an experience that really had very low cost, right? It cost a little electricity and a little internet. In a previous generation of the world, right, if I wanted to give my children that kind of cross-cultural experience, I'd have to put them on a plane and fly them, which would be a lot more impactful to the environment. And so I would say, when you think about game technology, it's a very green technology, right? Because it enables us to have these experiences. And you can see it in other ways too, right? When I buy something from Amazon, no longer do I drive to the store. These are just kind of my own thoughts. So part of the way I talk about this is, states spend a lot of money luring companies that develop video games. Not only do they have high-paying jobs, but they're very green. And they help the economy. And it has an impact on other things in terms of training, right? So one of the other projects that our students did is, if you remember, a few years back there was the oil rig explosion in the Gulf. Is they have created a 3D environment where when you run through that environment, in virtual reality, you go do that. Because it turns out when you're on an oil well and things are starting to go bad and things are blowing up, if you know to run left and then the button is the one on the top that you press, having a muscle memory, remember that, is a lot better than watching a video or seeing a picture in a book. And so they created this environment where everyone who went out to the well would have to go through it, right? And do okay, things are starting to blow up. Do you know where to run? Do you know which lever to pull to prevent things going bad? So I think there's a way that often we just think, oh, games are violent, that they bring real societal good. I could get on that soapbox and go for a long time. This is a little bit of data. Our last career fair, we had 36 companies come to hire our students. One of the local companies told us it's easy to get money to pay for us to develop games. What's hard is getting good people that know how to build them. So talk a little bit about what the Guildhall is. Actually, I'll take a little, this is a fun problem because it really combines so many things, but it shows what's in games. So most of you have probably seen wireframes of 3D models like from Pixar movies and so forth, and then you see the one with the texture that puts the colors and everything on them. But if you think about how this happens, is you have a 3D model that's made up of all these little triangles and squares, rectangles. You have that here but it goes on a flat sheet that then somebody paints the image of. Well, if you've ever tried to wrap a gift that isn't a nice box, you're trying to fold that paper over it, you always get little parts that bunch up, little extra parts you have to cut off, and it's a real pain. Well, you have the same problem here, because how do you stretch this flat 2D image over a 3D model? And then you start asking questions, once I figure out how to do that, how do I do it efficiently? How do I do it without wasted space? Because it's not going to fit exactly. And so it's a bit of a math problem, actually. It's a fitting problem. But how do you get all these two-dimensional figures to fit in the tightest space possible and not distort and stretch or rip when it goes up on the 3D model? This is one of the skills we teach our students. It's called unwrapping. It's like a gift, I guess. Maybe we should call it wrapping. And this student did it particularly well. I don't know if you can see it back there, but there's very little free space there. Really art and technology coming together. So, Guildhall. Originally we were set up, some of you may or may not know that there is an argument to be made that one of the birthplaces of the video game industry was not only just here in North Texas, actually here in Mesquite. Does anyone know what company? id, absolutely. But a number of local companies, id and Gearbox, came to us and said, we need you to train the next generation of developers. What we did is a little different than some other schools that have set up. Instead of finding faculty who happen to like video games, we said, okay, now you can teach a game program. We went out to local game companies and found the people who had the degrees that the university likes, hired them, brought in industry professionals, and the goal that we would, as we say, we want to teach in the style and the pace of the video game industry. Much like a medical school. Actually, I didn't update my slides. We're actually 650, we round up. So, when you're like, when we did this slide, it was like 630. We didn't quite want to round up. Anyhow, we were talking about earlier, we're academics, we measure everything. One of the things we do is we send out surveys to our alumni. One of the questions we ask is, are you in a position of leadership in your company? And we get about 40% back in 4 years. Another thing to look at is, I've said there are a lot of great jobs for people who have skills in game development. But one of the problems is if you go look at the ads, and you can go see them online, almost every single one of them will have the requirement, you must have already shipped one title. One shipped title. And so the question is chicken and the egg. How do I get one shipped title if the only way to get a job is to have one shipped title, right? I guess you could go the indie route, and certainly people do that. We believe one of the answers is the Guildhall. When you are there, you make 3 games, and industry tells us that that is very much equivalent. This is one of our capstone games, the last of the 3. And if the presentation gods smile on me today. Okay, let's.
This Yui gallery is an exploration to artistic expression using groundbreaking technology and mechanics.
New arrival detected. The main lobby.
Apologies if I seem out of sorts. It's been many months since my last pupil died. It is an egregiously large pleasure to meet you. Why don't you call me Blood Curator? Yes, that makes the right body parts tingle. But enough about me. Let us begin your journey. So to appreciate my revolutionary work, you must be in this special club. Seems like it fits you perfectly.
Integrating artistic appreciation enhancement apparatus.
You now have very limited control over gravity.
Body door malfunctioning.
Nothing is wrong. Just get this
Okay. So I always practice your presentation. That's coming up. Yeah, there we go. Get back to where we were. So that was one of the games. We'll show it in time, so I won't show the other trailers. But one of the reasons we're very, very proud of that game, this is of all three of these, I believe, we put them up on Steam Greenlight, where people can vote and say, if that game were for sale, I would buy it, I would pay money for it. And if you do, then Steam will sell it. So all three of these have been greenlit, so we're real proud of them.
I voted on you.
All right, thank you. We talked a little bit about this, that making a game really requires 4 disciplines. You need artists, you need designers, you need programmers, we call that software development, production management. It's a master's degree, it's 2 years. Our artists have to do an anatomy, because that's part of doing humans. And I'll say, one of the things we are at the Guild Hall in the last couple minutes is we're very much about the high concepts. And so we've talked about the video game industry, and we all have an idea of that. And I've talked a little bit about this, but I want to say one of the things, I asked our faculty once, why do you teach it? Many of you could be making much more money, making games, because that's where you came from. And they all came back with some variation on the same theme. It was very interesting to me. So if you look back across history, there have been inventions or discoveries that have changed how people interact. The invention of writing, right? As soon as I can write things down, That gives me the ability to communicate across time and distance, right? I can send a message to someone who I've never met, who lives far away from me. They can communicate back with me. I can leave things written so generations after me can know what I was thinking, even after I'm long dead. That changed how people interacted. You know, you move forward, you come to the printing press, which democratized reading and writing, and now all of a sudden everyone can read and write. There were literally wars fought trying to prevent people from reading books because, you know, if they think their own thoughts, maybe it will change society. You move forward. You know, you get to the telegraph, right? All of a sudden now, not only can I communicate with people at a distance, I can do it in real time. I can know what's happening across the country within minutes instead of weeks. That changes how people do business. I mean, it's amazing to me, right, that titans of, you know, big CEOs of big corporations would used to get on steamships and go to Europe and literally not have any idea what was happening to their company for a month. Can you imagine a CEO not having any idea what their company was doing for a month now? Who would do it? It just happened, right? Then you get radio and TV. Now all of a sudden you get audio and images. And I can see real time what's happening beyond my personal space. And I think we are, in the 21st century, on the cusp of another great revolution. And it has come by a couple of technologies. Pervasive networking and these interactive online spaces. So you can think about that. Facebook is, I think just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, is that still, you can get videos, you can kind of post things. But imagine when you start taking some of these interactive technologies from games, right? That we can have avatars moving through spaces in VR and this real-time communication with anybody on the globe. This will change and define what culture and society is. And therefore, the people who know how to author and speak into this space, not only will they make some great entertainment for us, of which I'm very grateful, they will be the people who will define the future of the world, of the culture. And so, when I ask my faculty, why are you teaching here, is they say, I want to help define the future. You think about it, that's no small thing. We're not just that game school who does cheap pop entertainment. People take it very seriously. And so, and you see that among our students too. Obviously, a lot of them go out and take jobs, and like I said earlier, there's like, if it's a big company, it's a major title, I can guarantee you one of our alumni worked on it. But we also see things. One of our alumni started a company down in Houston, and it's for children getting difficult medical procedures, which is often very stressful. And so what they've done is they will go interview that child and ask, what's your happy place? The beach, the mountains, the fantasy castle, whatever it is. They will then recreate that space in VR. So during the procedure, that child can be in the VR and be in their happy space and not see all the tubes and awful stuff that's happening. And you start to do some studies around this, and you find that not only is that great for the child's experience, but because the child is not as stressed, you get better medical outcomes as well. So there is real, value to it beyond just helping kids feel good. We're getting towards the end, so I will just start looking at the pictures and say, are there questions? I could talk for hours. That's part of it. I'm sure you know your faculty can do this, right?
Yeah.
That's bred into us.
What's your favorite game engine to program for?
What's my favorite? I am agnostic. Game engines come and go. They're very fashionable. That said, we have a breadth and depth theory at the Guildhall. So in terms of depth, all of our students go deep into Unity and deep into Unreal 4. We're real tight with both companies. One of our speakers last year was Dave Helleson, founder of Unity. We work real closely with Unreal 4 as well. And work, we visit them, they visit us. which has been great. That said, we also have this breadth thing. So we do the creation engine, and I don't know. I don't teach all the classes, but there's another about half dozen engines. Great question.
Do y'all require a bachelor's degree?
Well, as I say, it depends. It's a great answer for that college. We have a number of degrees. For the master's degree, we require a bachelor's. We also have a certificate degree, which does not require a bachelor's. One of the things that we often see in our certificate degree is, and this is part of the reason we did it, is veterans who will come back, who have served overseas, they don't have the bachelor's, but they've had a lot of training and obviously a lot of life experience that prepares them. So we can't do the master's, but we can do the certificate. So it allows people like that who have good life experience, already have some technical skills, a way to participate. Other questions?
So what would be a good bachelor's to have?
Depends what you want to go into. So if you want to go into programming, computer science is a great one. Although really the only thing you need to be is a great programmer to get into that. Art, typically we see people with Bachelors of Fine Arts, BFAs. Again, that's what most of the students are, but if you've got a great art portfolio, that works for us, right? When you look at production, as we say, as a business, often that's a BBA, a Bachelor's of Business Administration. Although we've gotten a few MBAs as well, because they want to specialize in this field. And then we get to level design, and quite frankly, that is everything. We've had music majors, creative writing, history. A few schools have design undergraduates now, but they are few and far between. So if you have a talent for design and an interest in that, that works.
What's the difference between the certificate program and the master's program?
Another great question. You take all the same classes and you're mixed between them. In fact, students may or may not know who's certificate and who's master's. But the difference is the master's students have to do a master's thesis and the certificate students do not. So there's obviously a lot of work in that. But
Will they both leave with 2 games or 3 games
Yeah.
under their belt
Yeah.
and ready to go into the job market?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, we have our annual career fair. And it's always, we get, as I said, what did I say? I forget the number. We always get everything from local companies who are interested in, we had a drone company here, a local drone company was looking to do the user interface for someone to do that for their drones, gamify that, to, as I say, kind of the tentpole of Cornerstone companies, Activision, Blizzard, ZeniMax, which you probably never heard of, but they own id, and Bethesda, like Fallout. So we get a good cross spectrum.
Do you have, what's the overall cost of the program just in general, and the job placement rate for graduates?
So both good questions. It's a 2-year program, and I don't know the exact figure across the top of my head, but it's a program fee for the whole thing. It's about $70,000. Most of our students do that on loans because we are a STEM program, but that's all in. So that's all the classes. One of the things we didn't get to in my slides, the students always say I get free. I'm like, well, free like your cell phone's free, right? It's a top-of-the-line Alienware. Well, it might not be Alien, but top-of-the-line gaming laptop, that can do the VR, and it comes loaded with Photoshop and 3D Max and all the tools, right? So the idea is even after you graduate, you still can continue to work on your skills in your portfolios to get that first job. If you look back across history, our placement rates well, we can do it at 6 months or 12 months, but at 6 months, it's over 85%. Obviously, it was a little lower in 2008, right? You know, not a lot of people were hiring for anything. And there's a little bit of difference. Typically, programmers get hired for artists, because that, again, that's a supply and demand thing.
What's the, I guess, the graduation/completion rate for both the masters?
I know we have to report that. Let's just look at that. We lose very few people. I don't know what it is, but we're over 80%. Probably higher than that, but I don't want to do it. Typically, the only reason we lose people is for some life event, right? And we lose a few people who come in and just say, wow, this is a lot harder. See, this is the thing. This may sound really obvious, but just because you like to play games doesn't mean you like to make games. The same way, just because you like to read a book doesn't mean you like to write. So we have a few that lead for that. But our students are very passionate. We can't. Our building is open from 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. And literally, you know, one of the things I, as administrator, deal with continually is students who are upset at the guard for kicking them out at 2 a.m. You know, this gets a little gross, but you know, sometimes we say, we want you out of the building because we want you to go home and shower, right? We don't want smelly students in the hall. But our students are very passionate.
What can make a student marketable, not just to get a job, but maybe to get that next degree? Because you and I were just talking about, you were going through applications. So if somebody gets a degree in programming, what's going to make them stand out to, get that next degree, get into a program like yours?
So this is great. It's a great question. And in fact, I was recently at an economic development council for North Texas. You may not know this, but if you look at North Texas, we're actually the second biggest number of developers, game developers in the world. First is LA, third is Seattle. And so one of the things that people are saying, we got a lot of game companies, a lot of developers in the area, you know, and so these consultants are coming in and asking you, what is it you look for? What makes you stand out? It's basically the same question. And I listened to these CEOs of these local game companies talk, and they said two things. One is competence. They need to be able to do the skill that we're hiring. So this really goes to portfolio, right? If I'm hiring someone to program, they need to be able to program. If I'm hiring somebody to make art, they need to be able to make art. That's kind of obvious. I think most people get that. And the second one they said is character, which is, I use it, 2 C words, competency and character, but it's really, can I work in a team? You know, earlier I said, Call of Duty, might have 400 people at it. You think about the creative talent on that team. Creative people, by their very nature, have a little bit of ego, right? But they're probably not going to be creative. How do you get 400 highly creative, highly skilled people all to want to make the same thing? That's not an easy task. And so that's why at the Guildhall we have this, we're very team-based. Our students, we say we make 3 games. The first game is 4 people, 1 from each discipline. The next one is 8, and then 16. Because one of the skills that is so crucial is how do you work on a team? This is actually, maybe as I'm looking at the time, maybe kind of a fun story to end with. One of the local game studios, I won't out them, when they interview here, they have a policy that everybody in the company can interview a new person. If anyone votes no, that person isn't hired. Talk about like reality TV shows, right? Voted off. But one of the questions they ask, so all the people fill out a rubric on, the candidate. One of the questions is, if you were trapped in an elevator for 4 hours with this person, would there be violence? You notice they don't say which way, right?
That's good.
Because it goes to, if you had to work in a stressful situation for this person for an extended period of time, would you be willing to do it? So that really is, competency will get you in the door, your skills will get you the interview, it's really the character that will get you the job. So that's what we look for as well when we bring people in. We're at the end. I am happy to stay a little bit longer, but I do want to be respectful of your time. And as a bonus for coming, because we are so generous at the Guildhall, we have some printed material if you're interested. Feel free to take one, and everyone can have. I think I have enough. We got some great cups with our branding on, so please stop and get one.